Welcome, reanimated fans, to this week's episode. We are talking about Midnight Mass, the next couple of episodes, episodes 5 and 6. And we're here with Stuart Tiffin, my intrepid co-host. Hello.
Ahoy. Good morning.
As well as special guest star, Kyle Diaz. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. Before we head into our recap review, we have a couple of news items. One that is quite seasonal. It's a trailer for Black Friday, which has none other than Bruce Campbell in it. And it's not quite zombie, but definitely about the horrors of, shopping after Thanksgiving, I suppose. I will say Bruce Campbell is looking pretty good.
I mean, he looks an appropriate amount of old for how old he must be, which must be like close to in his 70s or close to his 70s.
Yeah, I don't think he's 70 yet. Is he? I don't know. I like to make him younger than he is, maybe, because he's Bruce Campbell. So anyway, I guess we'll check that out, and I don't know if we'll review it or not, but the trailer itself is actually quite entertaining.
I think we're gonna have to watch it. I mean, it's like it's got a lot of Romero in its bloodstream there, where it's like cursing out the consumer society. Yep. And yeah, I think.
Oh no, it's got all it ticks all those boxes. So we may have to like take that and make it a special holiday review or something like that. And then Sadder News in Walking Dead, Stephen Campbell, who's a director of photography, has passed away. And you can definitely see his work, I think, at least in the first few seasons of Walking Dead. And it definitely was a lot of what made that show, like the visuals of that, pretty incredible. So that's pretty sad. And, I like to note these things because it isn't just the actors that kind of make up a show. And so, a tough week for Walking Dead peeps. And a lot of the actors and writers on the show were giving their remembrances of him. So
I guess he and Michael Satrazemis used to trade off on the director of photography duties, Michael Satrazemis had some nice things to say. And dude had to like work in a camera rental store for a long time before he made it into the industry. So he kind of worked his way up the ranks.
Right. And last but not least, also Walking Dead alum, Laurie Holden, amongst everyone, is going to be in The Boys season 3, but there's some good stills and good things of her in that. So I'm looking forward to that season, although I have to admit, I'm like, I didn't know that they would be doing a season 3, but I guess they are. So we'll have to check that out.
I mean, I've been seeing a lot about season 3 because that dude from Supernatural is in it. What's his name? Yeah. Jensen Ackles. Mm-hmm. And his like the reveal of him being in season 3 came out really shortly after season 2 aired. So I
believe that there's a season 3. I just thought with the storyline, it's like, okay, I don't know. Anyway, but you know how these things go. I'm looking forward to seeing her in that. I think it's pretty cool. She looks awesome.
She actually does look really good. That she's going to be some sort of anarchist crimson countess, and her costume does look really good.
It looks really good. So looking forward to seeing that when it gets released. And I think these 2 episodes of Midnight Mass, I think one of them is definitely, to me, like it's a pretty strong episode. I kind of want to hop into that. So we're talking about episode 5, which is Gospels, and 6, which is Act of the Apostles. And this is basically, the episode 5 like leads off where we left off, to find out what happened to Riley. And this is why I just, I was not strong. I gave into the temptation, and after episode 4, I binged the rest of it. You did not, Stuart.
Nope. So still pure as the driven snow. Haven't watched the final episode. But...
Right. So I think you should kind of kick this one off to talk about this. And then I certainly have some commentary about it. But to me, this is one of the strongest episodes. Okay. There's a lot to cover here.
Yeah, this is the I guess the easy way to describe this episode is it's yeah, what happened to Riley? And we do discover that. Although the mechanism is a bit clanky, I feel like for he's like, I'm gonna tell you a story, you're not gonna believe it. Fade to flashback. And I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, that doesn't happen right away. First, we have to see some stuff. And honestly, this is kind of troubling for me for the next couple episodes, is what they're doing to Sheriff Hassan. And it begins here and it ends later, but we not only do we find that Riley hasn't come home, nobody really knows where he is, but there's a woman talking to the sheriff in his office, and she's like, and at first you don't know who she is, but it becomes clear pretty quickly that she's Bull's mom, and he keeps calling her Bull. And she's like, his name was Bill,
right?
And I thought that was hilarious. It's weird that she's a little more Southern than everybody else on the island.
This is a scene that I thought was a little strange. I thought it was overdone. I thought she was overdone. And I do think that they're clearly, and they echo some of the things she says. We hear Riley echo a very specific line later. But I thought that this was, I don't think it's weird that she's distraught that her son is missing. I think that I think it was overacted personally.
I thought that the performance by the mom was pretty good. I didn't think it was particularly overacted, but I just had completely forgotten who Bull was. But both times I watched this show through, so I feel like they didn't do a good enough job kind of bringing that plot point back, because he died
episode 2.
Yeah, it was a while ago. So yeah, I guess he's just been in some abandoned house somewhere this whole time. But
he's like the only human who's died so far, other than Joe Colley. And that comes up too in this interview with the sheriff, because the woman's like, he says, oh, I talked to Joe Colley and he was the last one to see Bull alive. And she's like, at least they didn't call him Bong, which actually had me laugh out loud in the scene. But then you're like, okay, so now you know that there are 2 missing people cases on his desk. And
what they do with the sheriff in this episode is horrible. He is, in this episode and the next, actually, he is just like bizarrely unmoved by everything, even as he can obviously tell that things are spinning rapidly out of control, and that a lot of people are suddenly going missing in his small little island town.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's like a population of less than 100 maybe, or
and by the time the third person comes into his office and is like, some weird shit is going down, and he's like, let me tell you about something that happened to me 15 years ago.
God.
Like, nobody cares, dude.
It's a 5 or 6 minute monologue. I mean, we've already talked about this tendency from Flanagan, right? But
yeah,
it's like a 6 minute monologue when Aaron Green is in his office, and it has like zero tie back until the very end, where he's like, xenophobia.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was very that felt like indulgent on the part of the writer, for sure.
Yeah, and he's bizarrely cold to these people. Like Aaron Green tells him that she miscarried, and he's just kind of like, sorry. Yep. Like, bummer.
I don't have a field for that on my form that I'm filling out.
I was like, you are a terrible sheriff. So I'm not a fan of what they did with him in this episode. And the next, he redeems himself a little bit toward the end of the next episode. But
sure, there's a lot of redemption going on at the end of the next episode, for a minute anyway. People are walking up to the church, and they're putting the sign on the church that says no more mass except at night.
And plus, Riley's dad comes to visit Father Paul at his house, right?
Yeah, later on. But at this point, it's really just Mildred is up and walking around the community, and people are like, what?
Yeah, because she now looks like 24 years old.
Yes, except for a little bit of gray hair.
And her huge grandma glasses.
Yeah. She actually just kind of looks like a hipster. So now also Riley is telling people... not Riley. Aaron is going to Riley's parents' house and being like, I don't know where he is. And she goes to the docks and tells Warren, and his dad like gets all ticked off. He's like, oh, he's not even going to try. Like, he clearly he doesn't give his son the benefit of the doubt in any scenario.
He thinks he's off binging or something like that.
And Sheriff does go looking for Joe Colley. Fine. I mean, I think that scene is just like he knocks on the door and nobody's there, and I think then he walks away. I don't remember. There was too much more to that scene.
But it's another missing person.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's shortly after he comes back from looking for Joe Collie that Aaron walks into his office.
Mhm.
And the first thing he asks her, he's like, "Are you two?" And then ellipsis, like, are you romantically involved? I mean, maybe that's part of the investigation, but is that the
Maybe.
first thing you ask? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
Yes.
know.
So that gives way to the 6 or 7 minute monologue that
Wait, so
ends.
does
What?
the long monologue happen then, or does it happen when he's talking to the doctor at the beginning of the next episode when she's like, people's blood is burning up?
Oh shit.
That I think that's when he goes off for a really long time, and I'm like, she just
That-
told you that people's blood is burning.
That's right. You're right. The monologue comes later, but he is
Yeah.
kind of inappropriate with Aaron too,
Yeah.
asking what did he talk about? Oh, he talked about death. Oh, okay. Well, he's probably killed himself.
Yeah, just like really like not subtle about it at all. Yeah, he's not very empathetic.
No. But then they have their midnight mass, which I guess is the day before Easter, and the priest starts talking about God's army is the basis of his homily.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have countries. We're all soldiers. God's going to tell you to do terrible things, and guess what? You're going to do them because morality is changing. I'm like, and luckily Mildred's sitting in there, and I couldn't really get a read on what her face was telling us until she walked out, but it was discussed, and I was kind of happy that at least one person on the island seems to have a brain of their own.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've been kind of wondering for a couple of episodes is, when Father Paul went to, or when I guess Monsignor went to his kind of holy site tour, he was suffering deep in the grasp of dementia. And I wonder whether there's limits to what the vampire blood can really do, because he's not acting like a person with all of his marbles. And I wonder if some of that is that the show is suggesting that he never kind of like fully recovered, even back before he quote unquote died. He had times when he was like very, very agitated and anxious and just kind of irrational seeming. What do you think? Is this genuinely a person who's got all of his perspective and marbles, or is this somebody who his brain was broken and it's just kind of like rewired itself in a way that made it semi-functional again?
Whether it's his old dementia that's still there, or the fact that he's under some sort of brain compulsion of the vampire influence, I've never been super clear, because like those questions I was asking last time, when he's still giving mass to people like Mildred after he's going through this transformation and feeling this intense discomfort. But I guess that's part of the complete lack of guilt that they explain away too. Like they don't feel bad about the terrible things they're doing. So that kind of explains the break in his approach to a lot of issues. But you just listen to him babbling about the explanations for why things are happening, and yeah, you do think that he does not have all of his faculties. Not having ever really had a scene with demented Pruitt where he's talking, you don't really know if
that's true.
You
just see him wandering around. Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. Like the thing is, he's also very, like, him and Bev Keane can just can turn people's minds, right? Like they have that power to just rhetoric at folks. Mm-hmm. I mean, Riley has a gift of gab too. He can talk, but it doesn't ever feel like he's actually persuading anybody of anything. He's just doing his like, oh, atheism's great lectures that don't really seem to, they just kind of bounce off of Aaron, for instance.
Yeah. I think, Mildred's the only one who like really outwardly freaks out, but I think that the townspeople are definitely struck by the sermon, and they're definitely kind of like, what is he talking about? And also, it's like 6 minutes long, which is not supposed to be what your Good Friday mass is like. But you can see kind of, especially Riley's parents and some of the other folks in town are getting a little concerned.
Yeah, maybe there's a lot of nodding though, but at the end of the homily, he also, his sign off is like, yeah, we're gonna do great things, and then like drops the mic. I thought that was funny. Yeah. But not ever having been to mass. Yeah. So then I think the next scene is basically Aaron is sleeping on the couch and there's a knock at the door and she opens it and oh my gosh, there's Riley. And he's just like, hey, let's hang out. It's super casual. And when you like watch the entire episode and you think again about how he approaches this door and his demeanor, it's a little odd. Like, I know he spent the entire night just wandering around and staring at everything. So maybe like his kind of weird stony expression, or like acting like nothing is weird, everything is normal. It's still pretty odd. And if I were Aaron Green I would not be like, yeah, let's go take that boat ride together.
I think that they were kind of trying to set this up as like, maybe I think they're kind of trying to make it a little bit of a, is he good, is he bad kind of situation where they're like, oh, like, totally. When he shows up at the door, his demeanor is a little bit ambiguous. And then, later on the boat, because they row out onto the water and he tells her his long story of, what happened to him during the last couple of days. And there's a moment where it's kind of like, is he dangerous? Is he not? And in both instances, like maybe just because of how they've written that character so far, or because of how he's been acted by the guy who I can only think of in my head as Matt Saracen from Friday Night Lights, but I forget the actor's name.
Me too.
I never really, I was never really worried for Aaron in those moments. I feel like there's just kind of an inherent goodness to Riley that shines through no matter what. So
right. And he's always like, his character has consistently proven to be the moral compass. Like he's always like going home to check on and like get home in time for curfew and those kinds of decisions. So yeah, I would agree that like all the groundwork has been done for us to believe that he is the moral alpha.
Yeah. And so I read him in that moment as kind of conflicted and, maybe scared, trying to kind of gather his fortitude. Oh, Zach Gilford, that's the name of the actor.
Yeah.
But I didn't really read him as going through some sort of genuine crisis that was going to, endanger Aaron, really.
There are moments, sure, like on the boat when she starts looking around and there's actually a POV camera shot of her like scoping out the horizon. But also, yeah, that boat, man, when they get in that boat, I don't know how much of it they're actually on real water, but it was pretty clear that they were not in a tiny boat on the open ocean. Like it was, I was out on just past Bodega Bay, just past the headland. That's a local water, feature of the coast in Sonoma County. And I was on a fairly large boat. And as soon as you get out of the protection of the bay, you are all over the place on the water. And they're just sitting there, just like barely
barely bobbing. Yeah, it looks like a lake.
And it's clearly like green screen. I mean, it's not terrible, right? But
it's not. And I guess it's supposed to be the Atlantic and maybe some sort of like, inlet of the Atlantic up near, all those kind of like Canadian channels and stuff. So I'm not really sure exactly where this is. Actually, that's a good question. Where specifically is this supposed to take place? Like off the coast of Maine or something?
I assume it's, what's the nearest big city? They've never really said. They're just like mainland.
Yeah. So in my mind, I pictured it as being like, somewhere off the coast of Maine where, I don't think the sea is as, wild over there as it is off the Northern California coast, but still.
Maybe. But that is a really small boat. That's like the boat you take out on a pond. And it's acting like they're on a pond, maybe, right? But yeah, they're supposed to be in the Atlantic. Or maybe some like Chesapeake Bay or something. Either way, I think there would have been a little more holding on to the edges and a little more movement in the camera. But either way, that's a fairly small gripe because the first thing Riley wants to talk about is the stars, man. It's like campfires in space. And then he's like, oh, no, now I'm going to tell you a story and it's going to be bonkers. And then we cut to with the flashback and it's like it picks up. We don't really know exactly how long. Maybe it's that 6 hours later or several hours later because it's those scenes of Father Paul re-breaking or unbreaking his neck.
Yeah, like putting it back where it's supposed to be.
It's pretty rough.
Yeah, it was pretty rough, and kind of like assuring him the whole time that he'll be fine. You know, not to jump too far ahead, but this entire long section here with Riley kind of coming to grips with what he is and learning what Monsignor is, and kind of going through the stages of grief about, you know, how he's been transformed, and fighting with Father Paul in some cases about this stuff. I think this is some of the very strongest stuff in the show, and it's where the kind of like stagey nature of this works really, really, really well. And I think that you get a sense of exactly what he's grappling with. These two actors, you know, mostly alone in a room together, just bouncing off each other, is absolutely compelling and absorbing. I think this is, you know, some of the strongest stuff in the show, and I really, really loved this.
I agree. It takes you back to the AA meeting where, you know, where they had one of their earlier conversations, and it was the same. It wasn't quite the same energy, but it was the same intensity between Hamish Linklater and Zach Gilford. I think that they do bounce off of each other really well. And it's an interesting symmetry to the story. Also, the fact that they're just back here and they're just like, yeah, now we're going to do Serenity, and you know, could try to keep all these elements of their AA meeting. Yeah, because Father Paul, or Pruitt, is so convinced that he's so assured, and yet he's so wrong at the same time, and it's frustrating.
Oh, this is an incredibly good scene, and actually one of my favorites, because there's a few things going on here. I think you've got Father Paul doing his AA, like reassuring counselor kind of role, and he keeps saying weird things that are just so, I mean, in this situation, kind of hilarious, to me, very black comedy, because it's like Riley's been woken up with, like, he knows that his neck has been broken, and he's kind of woken up in a pool of blood, and Father Paul keeps being like, come and listen to me and you'll feel a lot better, you know, and like this very caring thing, and like having an AA meeting in the midst of this like strangely horrific, bizarre situation. But he's still trying to act as if he is this reassuring presence when he is anything but.
It's very powerful scenes. Pruitt tells Riley the story of the mouse in the box, which, thanks to Zach Gilford's reaction and Riley's reaction to that story, you know that he's talking about Riley as an altar boy, and yet Riley hasn't put it together yet that he's Pruitt. I mean, he does a moment later.
Well, he did just come back from the dead, so you can excuse him for being a little out of it.
Yeah, but I mean, he's not confused. He's not too confused that he can't be like, oh wait, no, that wasn't you. That was Pruitt, and you know, like Pruitt tells him like, yeah, I got 10 years of devotion out of that, you know, fake miracle, which kind of also, I mean, we knew that Riley was an altar boy before, but it also kind of helps paint more of that backstory about his, you know, and the fact that he's come a long way since, or he's made a long journey into secular life since his youth, when he believed that God brought back a mouse.
But it also kind of underlines a common thing between Father Paul and Bev, actually, which is that despite their kind of professed faith, neither of them are totally secure in their understanding of you know, what they believe to be God's will and the natural cycle of humanity as created by God. Like, you know, I think a true believer's, you know, discussion about the mouse would have been, you know, this mouse is not Jesus and is not going to be resurrected, not the Son of God. And sometimes, you know, God just allows unfortunate things to happen. But instead, Monsignor kind of plays it off like this is a real miracle, and so the devotion that he gets from Riley is false. And similarly, the seeking to avoid death is actually a rejection of the most important parts of Catholic doctrine. So, you know, they're both doing these things that they're professing to say are are in line with their faith, but they're actually totally kind of opposed to it. So I thought this was an interesting look at his kind of early hypocrisy and willingness to deceive.
Well, I also think it gives a little bit of evidence about why he tolerates Bev to be around him, because everything that she seems to do. And I mean, I will say this is one thing I kept hoping, that there would be somehow more like a revelation about sort of the like, we know enough that she clearly was not extorting, but she took a lot of money from the people on the island. She hurt them to build this insane rec center that nobody uses, save looks like the father for these AA meetings or whatever it might be. One could even make some conclusion that the place is cursed, but because it was done with these ill intentions. But that was one thing I was struggling with during this, just even watching this, is like, up until this point, which is like why Father Riley was sort of tolerating her, and why clearly, even though she professes to be so faithful, all of her actions show the opposite. Nothing about her is kind. Everything serves her own self-interest, and she definitely does harm to many people all the time, and she doesn't really get called out on it, and certainly not by him. And instead, we see that he trusts her, and she's this like helpmeet for him, which is like really strange. But then when he tells this story, and then you kind of see her hovering around, and her sort of comments on, the things that she is doing to sort of encourage his belief about things like, oh, and Bev found this Bible passage, and that kind of thing, then it made a lot more sense. I still wanted to get a little bit more of an idea of their relationship before this whole transformation and before he went off to Jerusalem. I kind of thought that she was taking advantage of an elderly person who had dementia, like, even, though she did do the rec center or whatever, she clearly was using the faith of the congregation to her own means to sort of glorify herself. So I thought that was kind of a nice tie-in, and very, very subtle to some extent. But I don't know, she is an incredible actor, and I thought even more so in this and the next episode, where she is so like fervent but unlikable.
I thought I would get tired at some point of just watching her be absolutely unflappable in the face of these things, but somehow I'm not, and it's still just so funny every time. Like, there's a huge pool of blood on the floor. Riley's like half burned to death. They're screaming at one another, and she just walks in and she's like, so how's it going, everybody? Like, what's going on in here?
And and she'll be like, oh, do we need to clean up this mess? Like, she's very matter of fact about these things, which, some of the things about, and the nice part of having Riley there as like an outsider of this little cabal is that he is very, he has such a great, his facial expressions are incredible in this whole scene. Everybody in these scenes are great, but his sort of horror and his like, I cannot believe that this is happening, his disbelief, and also I think the fact that these people are believing it and swallowing this story that this is basically you're going to be saved, and this is a miracle and whatever. And his facial expressions, his body language show that he believes anything but. And I think that it's like a very cool contrast between the actors, and the energy is really excellent. So this was definitely one of my favorite scenes in the whole series.
There's a transition, or at least an arc in this scene for Riley though too, because Pruitt does get him to admit that he's jealous of that amorality that Pruitt expresses, that he feels nothing for Joe Colley's death. Whereas, Riley at first is like, but I think about the woman that I killed all the time. And I'm, he admits while he's kind of crying about it, he's like, oh God, yeah, I'm jealous that you don't feel it. And then he does drink Sturge's blood. And at first I felt really bad for Sturge in this scene, because he's got like Band-Aids all up his arm. And then, by the next episode, I'm like, screw you, Sturge, you're a piece of shit. But Sturge, obviously, like the fact that they have this cabal, as you called it, these like the mayor and Dolly and Sturge and Bev, like as this inside crew who have gotten nothing out of this so far. I mean, the mayor and his wife got Lisa's walking, but they're a puzzle to me. I mean, I get it. They're all interested in it, in the power and like, eternal life. And some of it is actual piety in the case of Wade and Dolly, and maybe Sturge, but they're odd. Like, what do you think how do you think they were just like, Sturge, start cutting yourself to feed the vampires? What?
Right. Well, and then there's also the other part of this, which is that, the Father Pruitt admits that he's been doing all, and he says it outright. So one of the things is that I think you have to know what you are doing in order to be like, if you are truly faithful, if you are a part of the church, if you believe in the church's doctrine, you have to do that voluntarily. And he openly admits that he's been doing this with nobody aware of what he's doing. You know what I mean? So they're not like, everybody is in the dark other than this little tiny group. And he has made the decision to basically change them and to impart this quote unquote angel blood to all of them. And he has made that decision versus them making the decision. And so it's very funny that he talks a lot about free will, because he doesn't really seem to be, leaving that open to the congregation, right? He's making the decisions. He's playing God. So
I think one of the most interesting things that we learn about Father Paul in this episode, and it's been hinted at before, but it comes out the most here, is that he's absolutely clear-eyed about what he's doing. There's no self-deception, and I actually would even venture to say that I'm really not sure how much of an effect the vampire is really having on him. I think he knows exactly all the things that he's done, and he just literally does not feel the guilt or remorse over them. He does not feel guilty for deceiving the town. He does not feel guilty for Joe's death. He doesn't feel guilty for Riley's death. He kind of is as bad as his actions suggest that he is, and the only reason that we kind of have these warm feeling towards him is because Hamish Linklater is really charming, and he's been putting on, and the character's been putting on this front.
Well, he does mention to Riley that the voice, quote unquote, of the angel keeps getting louder and louder the more he partakes and the more he gives in. So I wasn't sure if he means his own sort of inner voice, or if it actually is something to do with the creature, like whether that is influencing him and that base instinct is becoming stronger than his human instinct, and that he's convinced himself of this. Well, and he's hiding behind doctrine. And I do think it is telling that he is hiding behind doctrine that Bev is presenting to him. Because, if you are like, if this is your main believer, if this is the main person that you're using as support, I think everybody would agree. And this is just like everybody's reaction to Bev is just like with distaste and somewhat disgust. And I think one of another hilarious scene is when Bev greets Mildred Gunning. And it acts like, oh, this is a miracle. And both Bev and Mildred have they both clearly show how they're feeling, but their words are the opposite. So Bev is like, oh, I'm so happy you were saved. And she's clearly not. And Mildred is like, oh, it's good to see you. And she is like, the hug between them is the weirdest hug, I think, ever.
I really like how Mildred has come back and is just like kind of a badass.
Yeah. But this is the thing, though, is that if you're using Bev, is Father Pruitt's best top sort of lieutenant is Bev, I think that tells you everything you need to know about whether what he is doing is right or wrong.
Of course, there is some Bev on Pruitt stuff that happens in the next episode that makes you wonder about that choice too. But so the the flashback kind of comes to an end with Bev trying to persuade Pruitt to keep Riley locked up, but he's like, no, let the apostles go out and spread the word. And then you have there's like another montage set to some, I forget what the song is called, but there's a lot of hallelujahs and faith in the lyrics, and it's it's Riley wandering around and watching what's going on before walking up to Aaron's door. I mean, he was kind of creepily standing over the beds of his sleeping family for a few, and you're like, oh, what's going on? You're still not sure if he's going to start eating people. But finally, Aaron's like, well, you brought me out here where I can't get away. And he's like, no, it's the opposite.
Okay, I have to say, I do question this decision. I think it was a very cool idea and a very cool, and stressful thing. But Riley, come on, man. This is a pretty disturbing thing to do to somebody you purportedly love.
Also,
like, this is not right. And well, anyway, let's get into what happens. But this is like, and again, the monologuing.
What's to say he wouldn't have Riley lost his will and just eaten his girlfriend?
Correct. And I think, they do make a big show, of making you feel nervous about that, the way he does stand over his family. But he also, at one point when he's walking through the streets, kind of like grips his stomach. So, he's feeling the hunger when they go out in that boat. And this is a flashback to his whole dream where he's in a boat alone and then she's with him. And I think it's supposed to invoke that. But do we want to get into what happens? Because I think we do have to talk about it.
Absolutely. It's the end of the episode. Honestly, it's right. And how prescient is this guy? Like, this is actually not very secular. The fact that he was having dreams about exactly what was going to happen to him. So right. I wonder what Flanagan's trying to tell us there. Is he like, no, there really is a higher power, and it was giving Riley dreams about what was going to happen to him? What? That's kind of bananas.
Yeah, it's a little bit weird. But in any case, his big plan is to be out in the boat when the sun comes up. And then, he's like, oh, this is the only way you'll believe. And you know what, how she might have believed is if, he was in a house and maybe he went out and showed that he burned in the sun and come back in. Like, I don't know that you need to necessarily immolate yourself in a boat that could also burn, by the way. And she's in the middle of the ocean.
I think he wanted to be done, though. He didn't want to be a vampire. I mean, I get that, right? He's like, no, this is.
He did, but isn't this like kind of a coward's way out? Because he's leaving her to go and save the people on the island, and he's got all this power and he knows it. I don't know. Maybe he's avoiding the temptation and doesn't want to hurt anybody he loves, which I can get behind and I can agree with that. But to me, this is like a very strange thing to do to somebody who is the love of your life. And clearly she is, and she feels the same way about him. But, and I will say that the dramatic shooting, like, this is fantastic. This is just really, he hits this home, even as disturbing as I find it. But
as an addict, I have to agree with his choice. Like, he's an addict. He knows that. I think this is totally in line with his personality flaw, is that he doesn't have control over or he struggles with control over willpower and compulsion. And we've seen that vampirism is basically like a mega drug. So I do agree with how it goes. But you were starting to say, like, this is a powerful scene here, because I loved the transition from, suddenly he's on the boat with the woman that he killed in the car accident. And floating
and
away.
She's whole, and she's whole, and it's quiet, and she's like, it's all light filled and peace. You don't see any sort of negative thing for him on this end of things. Like, he doesn't feel anything, or at least that's not necessarily what seems to be the case.
What he was getting. And then hilarious laugh out loud cut to Aaron just screaming on the boat.
Hilarious. Yep. It's not hilarious. It's so disturbing. Her screams, sorry. and then the cut to black for the credits with her screams just like still going. Oh man. God.
Yeah, I was totally laughing. I don't know if that makes me a bad
I got to
person.
agree with Stuart. I was laughing too. So I think we're both of an equal.
I have a slightly more. I don't know. I have a slightly more positive read of Riley's actions, AJ, than it sounds like you. Thinking back on it, it seems kind of like a sick and twisted that Father Paul was leading the AA discussions and positioning himself as kind of this spiritual, guide for Riley, because Riley really has internalized the guilt and turned it to something, used it to make a moral choice that it was incredibly hard for him, and that's, all the years in prison perhaps helped with this, and the, kind of addiction therapy that he went through, has led him to take that guilt and use it as a way to make a really hard decision that Father Paul was much too cowardly to make. So I think this is him recognizing where this road leads, and knowing that he absolutely does not want to be there, and taking the only way that he can think of to kind of, stop that from ever happening and stop himself from becoming like them. So
I can read it that way too, but if I step back from the whole thing, yeah, it's a hard decision, but you're still leaving all his family, Aaron, you're leaving all of these people to be without telling them what's happening. And I understand that it's a fantastical story, and I know that he does try to leave some things to show them the way, but I still feel like there's a level of like, it's not like he gets to escape, and they are going to be left to deal with this, and these are not normal things to have to deal with Father Paul and all of them. And so I think that him making this decision, yes, I get exactly what you're saying, but I also think that he's kind of leaving them holding the bag to some extent. So it's like, I don't know what the answer is. And you're right. Maybe he's afraid that if he stays, he will easily become Father Paul because of his addictive tendencies, which is totally valid. But
like his advice to Aaron is run away, get as far away as you can.
Right.
I don't think any part of him thinks you can fight what's happening on the island. That doesn't seem to even occur. Mm-hmm. But I agree, like that would have been a different movie or a different show, like 30 Days of Night, which is what the next episode starts to turn into, where yes. I feel like it's the lead character by the end of 30 Days of Night is a vampire or a baby vamp and uses that to fight the other vampires. Like, and maybe we'll see some of that. But like what he tells Aaron is run. And what's kind of hilarious is between that and the next episode, she 100% forgets that. And she's like, he told me to stay and help everybody. I'm like, what? Oh, he never did. He did not.
He told you to get out
of there. And she's like, I'm trying to remember what the last thing he said to me was. Oh, I think it was run.
To kind of close out this episode, I agree that it's phenomenally shot. And Stuart, you alluded to it a moment ago, but the music throughout this episode specifically, I think the music throughout the whole series is pretty strong, but in this episode specifically, the music is so good. And the kind of like gentle chanting that's happening when he's wandering around the town and looking at everybody and seeing the world with all its little sparklies in his vampire vision or whatever. I just think it's a phenomenally well executed scene and episode from all perspectives of the production.
Like, I agree, like with the music, I thought was very haunting and mournful, and really made especially the final like few scenes of this just incredibly poignant. But also I noticed with the photography and the cinematography in this episode, I kept kind of coming back, like, especially, and this has been kind of the case for the series, it's really beautiful work. And it makes this just such a better, like almost like painterly looking. A lot of the lighting with Father Paul is very Rembrandt-esque. It looks like, and the tones are like contrast with different things. And then when you do the outside shots and a lot of the things with the lights, they look like Edward Hopper paintings. So the care that they took to make this look the way it did is a very, it's artful, but it also, I think, is in terms of how you're feeling about these characters and about these stories. It's got this, I don't want to say fairy tale aspect to it, but it does have like this like unreality to it that I think makes you accept some of the weirder things in this, and then also makes the things that are horrific even more horrific.
In terms of design and lighting, I was also kind of taken by the fact that as a vampire, he doesn't have to be in complete darkness. Like, he has just curtains are going to be fine. Even though there's clearly that sunlight coming through those curtains, he's not affected by it because the curtains protect him, I guess. But like that was nice because it meant that, you know, people can walk into the rectory, and I think this happens in the next episode, but people can walk into the rectory and there's a bunch of people in there, and there's Father Paul and it's daylight, but just because the windows are closed or the curtains are closed, everything's fine. And it lets you kind of keep up the pretense at least a little bit too. And it's I don't know if that's realistic or what, we're talking about vampires, but he doesn't at least have to like sleep in a coffin in the basement with no windows.
Right. Dobev does kind of yell at him at one point about the curtains being open or being not closed enough. So, but you're right. Like it makes it so that he's a little bit more functional, at least to some extent. Well, I think we're going to try to cover the next couple of episodes because we had a lot to do with this. And unfortunately I have a stop time today. Do you want to close us out?
I also wanted to give Kyle the opportunity for any parting thoughts on this episode. We've talked about like the rec center scenes being really powerful, but were there any other takeaways you had?
I think that, we've talked a little bit about the monologuing, and there's some really kind of rough monologues here, Stuart, that we talked about, especially toward the beginning of the episode. And then there's like this, there's just the stuff with Riley and Father Paul, just like it just snaps, like it just is so much more vibrant. And I think this episode has kind of like the best and the worst of the whole series in it in some ways. But overall, I just think that Riley story is so tragic. And I was rewatching it with my wife again last night, and she's just like, look, it's our second time seeing it, and we're still just both like so sad, like so sad. Poor Riley. And I wasn't expecting his exit from the series at this point, considering he's kind of been our main character so far. And I think that, like Aaron, the audience at the end of Gospels feels a little bit adrift, and it does have that great sense that you don't know where this is going to go now. So I think it really sets the stage up really nicely for a very kind of like action-packed closing couple of episodes.
And then circling back to the beginning, he says, "I did my best," just like Bull's mom did, which I don't know what we're supposed to conclude from that, because I think they're very different characters. But, maybe it's that they are both flawed, and maybe this is the best he could do. So maybe that should put my concerns to rest on, whether he should have stayed to help. But, but the next episode is also action packed. So I can't wait to talk about that with both of you. So let us know what you think about your thoughts. I'm hopping off here, but leaving it to the two gents to finish out the show. So ciao. And until next time, thanks for listening.
So yeah, thanks everybody for coming along on this ride. We are going to do it a little bit out of order. So we'll be hitting up episodes 6 and 7, which are Acts of the Apostles and Revelation next time. And if you want to talk about Riley's death, was it hilarious? Was it sad? The jury is split on this one. Sorry, Kyle. Sorry for being a bad person. You can let us know. Send us an email at reanimatedpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Twitter at reanimatedpcast, and of course our show notes with that Black Friday trailer and other links to news is at reanimatedpodcast.com. So yeah, my the nature of my soul and whether or not I'll be going to heaven is definitely up for grabs. But thanks for listening, and ta-ta for now.
See you, everybody.